Imagine discovering that the person you trust most in the world is secretly destroying everything you've built together. Imagine realizing that every smile, every handshake, every "you can count on me" partner was just part of a carefully orchestrated performance designed for your own downfall. This is the story of Ryan Mitchell, a man who believed in the power of true friendship until he discovered that people aren't always who they appear to be. In Denver, he had built what seemed like the perfect American dream alongside his best friend from college, Blake Coleman. Together, they transformed an idea born in a garage into a multi-million-dollar tech consulting company. But behind the facade of success and partnership, a devastating betrayal was being meticulously planned, brick by brick, lie by lie. The injustice Ryan was about to face went far beyond numbers on spreadsheets or fraudulent contracts. It was a complete violation of human trust, a betrayal that would involve not just business but also his family, his employees, and everything he believed about loyalty and friendship. Blake wasn't just a greedy partner. He was an experienced manipulator who had turned every moment of vulnerability, every shared confidence, every gesture of trust into a weapon against Ryan. For months, while Ryan worked honestly to grow the company, Blake secretly built his own version of reality, where he was the sole protagonist and Ryan was just an obstacle to be removed. The discovery of this betrayal wouldn't come like a bolt from the blue, but as a gradual and terrifying revelation that his own life had become a lie. But this story isn't just about betrayal and destruction. It's about what happens when a man loses everything: his company, his savings, his faith in people, and needs to find a way to start over from scratch. It's about the painful journey of recovery, not just financial, but emotional and spiritual. Ryan would discover that rebuilding a life after a betrayal of this magnitude requires more than just hard work. It demands a complete transformation of how we see the world and the people around us. The family that truly matters would reveal itself in the darkest hours, and true strength wouldn't come from revenge, but from the ability to forgive without forgetting, to trust again without being naive. What Ryan didn't know was that 5 years later, a chance encounter in a Seattle coffee shop would reveal an even more shocking truth about the motives behind the betrayal that destroyed his life. A truth that would force him to question everything he thought he knew about justice, forgiveness, and the complexity of human nature. Because sometimes the people who hurt us are also suffering in ways we never imagined. And sometimes true recovery only happens when we find the courage to see beyond our own pain and discover that even our enemies might need forgiveness. This is a story about how truth can be stranger than fiction, and how life's most difficult choices rarely have simple answers. You know that feeling when everything in life is finally falling into place? That's exactly what Ryan Mitchell felt every morning when he arrived at the Innovate Tech Solutions office in downtown Denver. At 35, he had achieved something many only dream of: a thriving company, built brick by brick alongside his best friend from his University of Colorado days. Blake Coleman wasn't just his business partner. He was practically a brother, someone who knew his fears, his ambitions, and even the peculiar way he organized his pens on his desk. The family Ryan had chosen to share not only profits with, but also the challenges of entrepreneurship in the competitive tech consulting market. The 22nd floor office had a view of the Rocky Mountains, and Ryan loved watching the snow-capped peaks while drinking his morning coffee. It was a sacred ritual, a moment of gratitude for everything they had accomplished together. Innovate Tech had grown from a two-guy startup in a garage to a company with 40 employees and million-dollar contracts. Every client won was a shared victory. Every challenge overcome strengthened the partnership that seemed unbreakable. Ryan truly believed he had found the perfect formula: hard work, honesty, and above all, mutual trust. After all, who needs rigid contracts when you have the word of a true friend? But life has a peculiar way of teaching us that not everything that glitters is gold. Small details began to bother Ryan, like pebbles in your shoe that you try to ignore but become increasingly irritating. Blake started arriving later at the office, always with convincing excuses about morning meetings or family commitments. The conversations that once flowed naturally during lunch became more superficial, as if there was an invisible veil between them. Ryan tried to push these thoughts away, attributing everything to the natural stress of company growth. After all, success brings responsibilities, and responsibilities bring pressure, or at least that's what he told himself every time he felt that knot in his stomach. Important client meetings began happening without Ryan, always with justifications that made sense on the surface. "You were busy with the Microsoft project," Blake would explain with that smile Ryan had known since college. "Didn't want to bother you." Those words echoed in Ryan's mind as he reviewed financial reports, trying to to understand why some numbers didn't match his expectations. It was like trying to assemble a puzzle with pieces that didn't seem to belong to the same game. The feeling that something was off grew each day, but Ryan fought against his own instincts, preferring to believe in the loyalty of a 15-year friendship. What troubled Ryan most was the subtle change in the team's behavior. Employees who once greeted him enthusiastically now seemed to avoid prolonged eye contact. Conversations would stop abruptly when he entered a room, creating an atmosphere of tension that cut through the air like a sharp blade. Jessica, his wife, had commented several times about how Blake seemed distant at company parties, but Ryan always defended his friend. "He's going through a tough time with his family," he would justify, not realizing he was being carefully manipulated into believing an edited version of reality. Betrayal was still a distant concept, something that happened only in soap operas or to other people. The nights became long and restless for Ryan. He found himself waking up at 3 in the morning, his mind buzzing with unanswered questions. Why had Blake changed the financial system passwords without telling him? Why did monthly reports always arrive late? Why did he feel like a stranger in the very company he had helped create? These doubts ate away at his inner peace like acid, but Ryan continued fighting against them, clinging to the hope that it was all just paranoia. After all, questioning Blake's integrity would mean questioning the foundations of everything he believed about friendship, loyalty, and partnership. It was easier to blame stress than face the possibility that his trust was being systematically betrayed. The injustice of being kept in the dark about his own company's direction began manifesting in small signs that Ryan desperately tried to ignore. Meetings scheduled at times he couldn't attend, important decisions made in his absence, contracts signed without his prior approval. It was as if he was being gradually erased from the story he himself had helped write. Each day brought a new disturbing discovery, a new piece of a dark puzzle that Ryan still didn't have the courage to complete. Worst of all was the growing sensation that his own naivety was being used against him, turning his greatest virtue, blind trust in a friend, into his greatest vulnerability. It was one of those Thursday nights when Denver seemed quieter than usual, with only the distant sound of traffic echoing through the office windows. Ryan had decided to stay late to catch up on some reports that had been piling up, a task that, ironically, should have been shared with Blake, but his partner always found an excuse to postpone. The empty office had an almost ghostly atmosphere, with only the light from his desk cutting through the darkness of the space. It was in these moments of solitude that Ryan could think most clearly, away from the distractions and seemingly casual conversations that Blake always started when he noticed Ryan was concentrating too much on the numbers. Betrayal was still just a vague suspicion, a shadow dancing on the periphery of his consciousness, but one he continued to be reluctant to confront directly. Chance has a cruel way of revealing truths we'd prefer to keep buried. When Ryan got up to get more coffee from the kitchen, he accidentally bumped into Blake's desk, knocking over a pile of papers that were carefully organized. As he bent down to collect them, his eyes caught something that made his blood run cold: bank transfers with astronomical amounts, all directed to an account he didn't recognize. It wasn't the numbers themselves that shocked him. After all, the company regularly moved considerable sums, but rather the dates and frequency of these transactions. They always happened on days when Blake claimed to be handling administrative matters or visiting potential clients. It was as if a curtain had been brutally torn away, exposing a stage where a completely different play was being performed. Ryan's hands trembled as he leafed through the documents, each page revealing a new layer of deception that had been carefully constructed over months. Parallel contracts with their biggest clients, agreements that redirected part of the payments to a shell company, signatures that looked like his but had small differences that only a trained eye could detect. It was an operation of impressive sophistication, orchestrated with the precision of a conductor leading a symphony. Ryan felt like an actor who discovered he was participating in a play without knowing the script, while everyone around him knew exactly what role they were playing. The feeling of injustice began transforming into something deeper and more visceral, the realization that he had been systematically deceived by someone in whom he placed absolute trust. What hurt most wasn't just the numbers, though they were devastating, but the meticulousness with which everything had been planned. Blake hadn't acted on impulse or in a moment of weakness. Every move had been calculated, every lie carefully constructed to keep Ryan in the dark. The documents revealed secret meetings that happened on weekends, when Ryan was at home with Jessica, enjoying family time. While he believed he was building an empire alongside his best friend, Blake was was secretly dismantling everything from within, like a termite that corrodes a house's structure without the residents noticing. It was such a complete and comprehensive betrayal that Ryan wondered if he had ever really known the person with whom he shared not only profits, but also his dreams and aspirations. The discovery of a second company registered in Blake's name was the final blow that revelatory night. Innovate Tech Consulting, a name dangerously similar to the company they had built together, had been registered 6 months ago, exactly during the period when Blake had begun behaving strangely. The documents showed that several of their most talented employees had already signed contracts with this new company, probably without knowing they were being used as pawns in a much larger game. Ryan felt like a general who discovered that half his army had been secretly recruited by the enemy. The feeling of isolation was overwhelming. How many people around him knew the truth while he continued believing the charade? Every document Ryan examined was like a stab to his deepest convictions about loyalty and friendship. There were printed emails showing Blake discussing strategies to accelerate the transition and minimize the partner's suspicions. Seeing his own name being used so casually and calculatedly in conversations about how to deceive him was a surreal and devastating experience. It was like discovering you're the protagonist of a horror movie, but all the other characters know it except you. Recovery of his trust in people seemed impossible at that moment. If Blake, his closest friend, was capable of such dishonesty, who else could he trust? The world Ryan knew was crumbling, brick by brick, revealing a much darker reality underneath. When Ryan finally finished examining all the documents, the sun was already rising on the horizon, painting Denver's sky with orange tones that cruelly contrasted with the darkness that had settled in his heart. He knew there was no going back. Innocence had been lost forever, replaced by a painful clarity about human nature and how greed can corrupt even the most sacred bonds. The office that once represented achievement and success now seemed like a mausoleum of destroyed dreams. Ryan carefully stored all the documents, knowing he would need them as evidence, but also as a reminder that people aren't always who they appear to be. The betrayal had been revealed, but the consequences of this discovery were yet to come, promising to transform not only his professional life, but also his ability to trust again. The discovery of those documents was just the tip of the iceberg, as Ryan would soon discover in the following days. Armed with the terrible truth about Blake's secret activities, he began a discreet investigation that would reveal the staggering extent of the betrayal that had been orchestrated right under his nose. It was as if he had found a loose thread in a tapestry, and by pulling it, the entire structure began to unravel, revealing a completely different pattern than he had imagined. Each new discovery was more shocking than the last, painting a picture of manipulation and deception that went far beyond simple financial diversions. Ryan felt like a detective investigating a crime of which he himself was the victim, an experience that was both empowering and devastatingly painful. The first shock came when Ryan discovered that Blake had been preparing his rival company for almost a year, long before the first suspicions began to surface. The records showed meetings with lawyers specializing in partnership dissolution, consultations with accountants about asset transfers, and even conversations with a headhunter about how to attract talent from competing firms. It was a military operation in its precision, every move calculated to maximize Blake's gains while minimizing Ryan's chances of discovering it in time to defend himself. The injustice of the situation was glaring. While Ryan worked honestly to grow the company, Blake used every success as an opportunity to strengthen his own position and weaken his partners. It was like discovering that your dance partner had been secretly learning a different choreography. But what really broke Ryan's heart was discovering how many close people had been involved in the conspiracy, consciously or not. Amanda Torres, the financial manager he trusted blindly, had been recruited months earlier with promises of a better position at Blake's new company. The emails Ryan found showed how she had been providing privileged information about clients, cash flow, and future strategies. Michael Davis, the technology director Ryan considered a friend, had signed a non-compete agreement with Innovate Tech Consulting while still receiving salary from the original company. It was like discovering that half of his professional family had secretly switched sides, leaving him isolated in his own company. The feeling of paranoia was overwhelming. Ryan wondered if anyone around him was still genuinely loyal, or if they were all just playing a role. The investigation also revealed how Blake had used intimate information about Ryan's personal life to manipulate the situation in his favor. Jessica, his wife, had been subtly probed during dinners and social events about the company's future plans, Ryan's concerns, and even details about their personal finances. Blake had turned casual conversations between couples into espionage sessions, using trust and friendship friendship as tools to gather intelligence. Ryan now remembered how Blake always asked seemingly innocent questions during backyard barbecues. How's the IBM project going? Did Ryan mention anything about expanding to the West Coast? Are you guys thinking about investing in real estate? Each question was a carefully disguised probe, and Jessica, unknowingly, had provided valuable information that Blake used to anticipate and sabotage Ryan's strategies. The cruelest aspect of the betrayal was how Blake had used the company's own success against Ryan. Every important client they won together became a target for Blake's parallel operation. Contracts were structured so that a significant portion of payments could be redirected through consulting fees and specialized services that actually went straight to the shell company's account. Ryan discovered that some of his greatest professional successes had actually been financial victories for Blake. It was like discovering you were running a marathon while your training partner secretly took shortcuts and still took part of your prize money. Recovery of his professional self-esteem seemed impossible when Ryan realized how he had been systematically used and deceived. Perhaps the most disturbing discovery was finding a detailed document that Blake had prepared, describing Ryan as overly trusting and easily manipulated. The report, clearly intended for investors or potential partners, painted Ryan as an incompetent partner who needed to be gradually removed from the operation. Reading about himself through the eyes of someone he considered a brother was a traumatic experience Ryan would never forget. Blake had meticulously documented every weakness, every blind spot, every personality trait that could be exploited. It was like discovering that your best friend had been secretly writing a manual on how to destroy you. The sense of violation was total. Not only had his trust been betrayed, but his very identity had been dissected and weaponized against him. As the evidence accumulated, Ryan began to understand that he wasn't just dealing with greed or excessive ambition, but with something much more sinister, a systematic campaign to destroy not only his stake in the company, but also his reputation and his ability to start over. Blake had planted seeds of doubt about Ryan's competence with important clients, had questioned his decisions in meetings, and had even suggested to some investors that Ryan was losing focus and maybe needed a break. It was a subtle but effective smear campaign designed to make Ryan's eventual departure seem natural and even necessary. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was personal, professional, and deeply psychological. Ryan realized he was fighting not just for his company, but for his own sanity and dignity in a battle where the rules had been secretly changed, and he was the only one who didn't know it. The moment of truth came on a Monday morning that Ryan would never forget, when he decided he could no longer pretend ignorance about what he had discovered. Armed with stacks of evidence and his heart heavy with the betrayal that had been meticulously documented, he arrived at the office earlier than usual, prepared for the confrontation that would define not only the company's future, but also the direction of his life. Blake arrived at 9 sharp, as always, with that confident smile and casual greeting that now sounded like a cruel joke to Ryan's ears. "Good morning, partner," Blake said, not imagining this would probably be the last time he'd use that word without irony. Ryan felt his stomach turn. How could someone be so convincing in their falsehood? It was like watching an experienced actor performing a role he had rehearsed for months. Ryan's office transformed into an improvised courtroom when he spread all the documents across the desk, creating a devastating mosaic of lies and manipulations. Blake entered with his morning coffee and his carefree expression, which quickly transformed into something between surprise and panic when he saw the evidence of his crimes neatly arranged. "We need to talk," Ryan said, his voice trembling not with fear, but with contained rage that had been building for weeks. Blake tried to maintain his composure, but Ryan could see sweat beginning to form on his forehead. It was fascinating and terrifying at the same time to watch how the mask of friendship and loyalty dissolved in real time, revealing underneath a person Ryan realized he had never really known. The injustice of having been deceived for so long burned in his chest like acid. "Can you explain this to me?" Ryan asked, pointing to the bank statements showing the suspicious transfers. Blake initially tried a defensive approach, claiming they were strategic investments and portfolio diversification, but his explanations sounded hollow and desperate. When Ryan presented the contracts for the parallel company, Blake changed tactics, trying to justify his actions as future planning and risk protection. It was impressive how someone could try to rationalize the irrational, turning betrayal into business strategy. Ryan remembered all the times Blake had looked him in the eyes and lied blatantly, and felt a mixture of disgust and admiration for his former friend friend's ability to maintain two completely different realities functioning simultaneously. The breaking point came when Ryan discovered right there during the confrontation that Blake had forged his signature on documents transferring majority ownership of the company. It was the final blow, the definitive betrayal that transformed Ryan from partner to employee in his own company. "You signed this last week," Blake said, trying to maintain a casual tone, but Ryan knew he had never seen that document before. The forgery was good, Blake had clearly practiced, but it wasn't perfect. Ryan knew his own signature better than anyone, and could see the small differences that exposed the fraud. It was like discovering that someone had stolen not only his possessions, but also his identity. The sense of violation was total and overwhelming. Blake hadn't just betrayed his trust, he had literally stolen his company. 15 years of friendship, Ryan murmured, more to himself than to Blake. 15 years building this together, and you planned this from the beginning? The question hung in the air like an accusation, and for the first time Blake seemed genuinely shaken. Not by guilt, Ryan realized, but by the inconvenience of being discovered. "It wasn't personal," Blake said, a phrase that sounded so absurd that Ryan almost laughed. How could stealing someone's life not be personal? How was destroying not just a business, but also a friendship and a person's trust not personal? Ryan looked at the man he had considered a brother and saw a complete stranger, someone who had used his kindness and trust as tools for his own destruction. The family he thought he had found in Blake was just a carefully constructed illusion. The confrontation intensified when Ryan demanded explanations about Jessica's involvement and that of other employees. Blake tried to minimize, claiming he had just asked some casual questions, but Ryan was no longer willing to accept half-truths. "You used my wife to spy on me," he accused, his voice rising in tone for the first time. "You turned my family into tools of your conspiracy." Blake finally abandoned any pretense of innocence and went on the attack, claiming that Ryan was too naive for modern business and that someone had to make the tough decisions. It was incredible how he could transform his own dishonesty into a virtue, painting Ryan as the villain for trusting too much. Recovery of his dignity seemed impossible when Ryan realized he was being blamed for having been honest. When Blake finally left the office that morning, taking only his personal belongings, Ryan was left alone with the wreckage of everything he had built. The company still existed on paper, but its soul had been ripped out. The loyal employees were few, the important clients had already been compromised, and the finances were in ruins. Ryan sat in his chair and looked out the window at the Rocky Mountains, the same mountains he had contemplated with hope and gratitude so many mornings before. Now the view seemed different, colder and more distant. He had lost not just a business, but also his faith in human nature. The dilemma before him was overwhelming: fight legally against someone who knew all his moves and weaknesses, or simply accept defeat and try to rebuild his life from scratch. Both options seemed impossible, but Ryan knew a choice would have to be made, and that decision would define not only his financial future, but also who he would become after this devastating betrayal. 5 years had passed since that devastating morning in Denver, and Ryan Mitchell had learned to rebuild his life brick by brick in Seattle, Washington. The move to the West Coast hadn't been just geographical, but also emotional and spiritual, an attempt to leave behind the scars of betrayal that had nearly destroyed him. Working as a freelance consultant, he had found relative peace in the simplicity of smaller projects and more transparent professional relationships. Jessica had stayed by his side throughout the entire recovery, and together, they had built a more modest life, but infinitely more honest. The family that truly mattered had grown stronger through adversity, proving that not all bonds can be broken by greed and dishonesty. Ryan had learned to trust again, though in a more cautious and selective way. It was a typical rainy Tuesday in Seattle when Ryan decided to stop by Victrola Coffee, his favorite refuge for working and watching the city's movement. The cafe had that cozy atmosphere he loved: tattooed baristas preparing artisanal drinks, University of Washington students typing furiously on their laptops, and the constant sound of rain creating a perfect soundtrack for concentration. Ryan was reviewing a proposal for a local client when a familiar movement caught his attention. In the opposite corner of the cafe, hunched over a cup of cold coffee, was Blake Coleman. Not the confident and manipulative Blake who had destroyed his life, but a diminished version, visibly dejected and desperate. It was like seeing a ghost from the past materialized in the present, bringing with it all the painful memories Ryan had worked so hard to overcome. The initial shock gave way to morbid curiosity. Blake seemed to have aged a decade in 5 years. Gray hair, wrinkled clothes, and a posture that screamed defeat. Ryan watched discreetly as his former partner nervously fidgeted with his phone, clearly waiting for a call that wasn't coming. It was a cruel irony of fate that they would meet right there, 1,000 miles from Denver, in a city where neither of them should be. Ryan remembered the words Blake had said during the confrontation. It wasn't personal. Looking at the destroyed man in front of him, Ryan wondered if Blake still believed that. The injustice he had felt for years began to mix with something unexpected, a pang of compassion for the man who had been his best friend before becoming his worst enemy. Against all his self-preservation instincts, Ryan stood up and walked to Blake's table. "Hello, Blake," he said simply, watching as his former partner's face contorted into a mixture of surprise, shame, and something that seemed almost like relief. Blake tried to compose himself, but it was obvious he was in a desperate situation. "Ryan, I didn't expect to see you here," he stammered, as if seeing a ghost. The conversation that followed was surreal. Two men who had shared dreams and then become mortal enemies, now sitting like strangers in a Seattle cafe. Blake seemed smaller, more fragile, as if the weight of his actions had literally diminished his physical presence. Ryan wondered if this was what guilt looked like when it finally caught up with someone, or if it was simply the inevitable result of a life built on lies. The truth began to emerge slowly, like water leaking from a cracked dam. Blake had lost everything. The company he had built on the ruins of betrayal had failed spectacularly, taking with it not only his fortune, but also his family. His wife had filed for divorce when she discovered the extent of his fraudulent activities and had taken the children to the other side of the country. "She said she couldn't look at me anymore," Blake confessed, his voice breaking. "Said I had become a stranger, someone she had never really known." Ryan heard these words with a mixture of dark satisfaction and genuine sadness. Justice had been done, but in a way no court could have ordered. Blake had been judged and condemned by the very consequences of his actions, losing everything that really mattered in pursuit of something he never really needed. But what Blake said next completely changed Ryan's perspective on the entire situation. With tears in his eyes and his voice trembling, Blake revealed the truth he had hidden all these years. He had been blackmailed. "They had photos of Sophie," he whispered, referring to his youngest daughter. "They said they would do something terrible to her if I didn't cooperate." The story that unfolded was more complex and dark than Ryan had ever imagined. Blake had gotten involved with criminal investors who discovered vulnerabilities in his personal life and used them as leverage. Ryan's betrayal hadn't been motivated by pure greed, but by paternal desperation and genuine fear for his family's safety. It was a revelation that recontextualized everything, transforming the villain into a victim and forcing Ryan to reconsider years of anger and resentment. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Ryan asked, his voice heavy with emotion. "We could have found a solution together." Blake shook his head sadly. "They said if I involved you, they would harm not only Sophie but Jessica too. I thought if I did what they wanted, at least you would be safe, even if you hated me forever." It was tortuous logic, born of desperation and fear, but Ryan began to understand the impossible situation Blake had found himself in. The recovery of his faith in humanity began at that moment, not because Blake had been absolved of his actions, but because Ryan finally understood that even the most painful betrayals sometimes arise from love and protection, distorted by the most extreme circumstances. Forgiveness still seemed distant, but for the first time in 5 years, Ryan glimpsed the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was a way for both of them to find peace with the past. Blake's revelation had completely transformed the dynamic of that unexpected encounter in Seattle. Ryan found himself at an emotional crossroads he never imagined facing. How to process the information that the man who had destroyed his life was also, in a way, a victim. The betrayal he had carried as an open wound for 5 years now revealed itself to be more complex and nuanced than any court could judge. Sitting in that cafe, surrounded by the buzz of everyday life, two men confronted the weight of impossible choices and their devastating consequences. Ryan felt as if he were looking into a distorted mirror. Blake had made terrible choices to protect his family, but in the process had destroyed Ryan's. It was a cruel irony that the motivation behind the betrayal was, paradoxically, the same family love that had sustained Ryan during his recovery. The silence that followed Blake's confession was loaded with conflicting emotions. Ryan observed the man in front of him, head down, defeated, carrying the weight of decisions that had cost him everything he loved. It was difficult to reconcile this broken figure with the confident manipulator who had orchestrated his financial destruction. "You could have come to me," Ryan said finally, his voice softer than expected. "We were friends, Blake, brothers. I would have found a way to help." Blake raised his eyes and Ryan saw in them a deep pain that mirrored his own. "I know," Blake whispered, "but they were very clear. Any involvement from you would mean danger for everyone we love. I thought if I did this alone, at least you would be safe." It was desperate logic, born from the terror of a father willing to do anything to protect his daughter. Ryan stood up from the table and walked to the window, watching the rain that continued falling over Seattle. His mind buzzed with contradictory questions and emotions. On one hand, the injustice he had suffered was real and devastating. Years of lost work, destroyed dreams, shattered trust. On the other hand, Blake had paid an even higher price. He had lost not only his material possessions but also his family, his dignity, and his inner peace. It was as if the universe had created a situation where there were no winners, only different degrees of loss. Ryan remembered the sleepless nights after discovering the betrayal, when Jessica would find him awake at 3 in the morning, struggling against thoughts of revenge and justice. Now, faced with the real opportunity to see Blake destroyed, he discovered that revenge had a bitter and empty taste. "The criminals?" Ryan asked, turning to Blake. "Are they still out there?" Blake nodded sadly. "Worse than ever. When my company went bankrupt, they lost their source of clean money. Now they want me to pay back everything they invested in me, with interest. That's why I'm here, trying to hide, trying to find a way to start over without them finding me." The situation was even more complex than Ryan had imagined. Blake wasn't just a repentant man. He was a man in danger, running from people who wouldn't hesitate to use violence to recover their investments. Ryan realized he had a choice to make. He could abandon Blake to his own fate, considering it poetic justice, or he could find a way to help, even after everything that had happened. Ryan's decision surprised even himself. "Do you have evidence about these criminals?" he asked, sitting down again. Blake looked at him with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "I have everything documented. Names, bank accounts, operating methods. I knew I might need this as life insurance someday." Ryan nodded slowly, an idea beginning to form in his mind. "Then let's go to the authorities. Together." The word "together" sounded strange coming from his mouth, but Ryan realized it was the only way to break the cycle of destruction that had consumed both their lives. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or completely absolving, but rather choosing a path that could lead to recovery for both, instead of perpetuating mutual destruction. Blake cried when Ryan offered his help. They weren't just tears of relief, but of gratitude for a second chance he knew he didn't deserve. "Why?" he asked, his voice broken. "After everything I did, why would you help me?" Ryan thought for a long moment before responding. "Because I discovered that carrying hatred is heavier than carrying forgiveness. And because, despite everything, I still remember the man you were before all this happened." It was an answer that surprised Ryan himself. 5 years earlier, he never would have imagined being capable of such words. But recovery had taught him that true strength doesn't come from revenge, but from the ability to choose a better path, even when you have every reason to choose the worst. The days that followed were intense and transformative. Ryan helped Blake organize all the evidence and accompanied him to the FBI, where they gave detailed testimonies about the criminal operation. It was a painful process for both. Blake had to publicly admit his crimes, while Ryan had to relive the entire betrayal in legal detail. But it was also liberating. For the first time in years, both were on the same side, fighting against a common enemy. The injustice Ryan had suffered finally found a constructive channel, and Blake finally had the chance to do something right after so many wrong decisions. When the criminals were arrested and their operations dismantled, Ryan recovered not only part of his assets through the legal process, but also something much more valuable: the ability to trust again, not blindly as before, but with wisdom born from experience. Forgiveness had revealed itself not as weakness, but as the most powerful form of recovery, not just financial, but emotional and spiritual. The story of Ryan and Blake teaches us a profound lesson about the complexity of human nature and the transformative power of forgiveness. When we think we know the whole truth about a situation, life has a peculiar way of showing us that there are always deeper layers, hidden motivations, and circumstances we never imagined. The betrayal that destroyed Ryan's life was born not from pure greed, but from a father's desperation trying to protect his family, a revelation that doesn't justify the actions, but humanizes them in an unexpected way. This reminds us that even people who hurt us deeply carry their own pain and fears, and that the injustice we suffer is sometimes just part of a much larger and more tragic puzzle. Ryan's true heroism wasn't in his ability to build a successful company, but in his courage to choose recovery over revenge. When he had the opportunity to see Blake destroyed and abandon him to his fate, he chose a more difficult path: active forgiveness. Not the passive forgiveness that simply forgets, but forgiveness that acts, that seeks justice constructively, and recognizes the humanity even in those who have hurt us. This choice not only freed Blake from a cycle of destruction, but also freed Ryan from carrying the weight of hatred for the rest of his life. The family he rebuilt with Jessica grew stronger, not despite the betrayal, but because of how they chose to deal with it together. True recovery, as we discover through this story, isn't just about rebuilding what we lost materially, but about becoming better people through the adversities we face. Ryan not only recovered part of his assets through the legal process against the criminals, but discovered an inner strength he never never knew he possessed. He learned that trust doesn't need to be blind to be real, that forgiveness isn't synonymous with weakness, and that sometimes the injustices we suffer can transform into opportunities for growth and transformation. Blake, in turn, found a chance for redemption that seemed impossible, proving it's never too late to do the right thing, even after a series of terrible choices. This story shows that what is hidden always comes to light, and that truth, however complex and painful, is what truly liberates. If you know someone who is going through a betrayal, who has lost faith in people, or who is struggling to find strength to forgive, share this story. Sometimes the right message arrives at exactly the right time, and maybe this is exactly what someone needs to hear today. If this story touched your heart and made you reflect on forgiveness, recovery, and second chances, hit that like button so more people can be inspired. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that show that even in the most difficult situations, there's always hope for a new beginning. Because in the end, our ability to forgive and start over is what makes us truly human.